The grand kitchen arena was alive with energy camera crews shifting, judges reviewing their notes, and contestants in their pristine white chef coats, sharpening knives under the bright studio lights. It was the final round of the most prestigious cooking competition in the country, where culinary elites competed for the ultimate title and a life-changing prize. And then there was her. Mina. She wore no fancy uniform, just a simple cotton apron embroidered with her grandmother's name. No designer knives, no high-end equipment, just the tools she had used at home for years. Her hair was tied back loosely, her hands rough from years of cooking not in restaurants, but in a tiny kitchen filled with the aroma of family recipes, passed down through generations. As the contestants lined up, some of them smirked when they saw her. A few whispered under their breath. "She's not even a trained chef," one said. "Did someone's aunt sneak into the competition?" Another chuckled. Even the judges exchanged polite, skeptical glances, but Mina stood silently at her station, unfazed. She knew she wasn't polished like the others. She didn't have a resume stacked with Michelin stars or international training. What she did have was a secret, something no one else there could replicate. A recipe older than any cookbook in the room. A recipe from her grandmother's hands to hers, rich with spices, stories, and soul. As the clock counted down to the start, Mina whispered softly to herself, "For you, Dottie, let them taste our story." The buzzer sounded, and with steady hands she began to cook, not for the judges, not for the cameras, but for the memory of home. The other chefs moved quickly, confidently, flames flaring, pans sizzling, sauces whisked with military precision. Each one had rehearsed their menu for weeks, crafting dishes that looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Every motion was showy, calculated, designed to impress the judges and cameras alike. Mina, on the other hand, moved differently. She started by pulling out a faded cloth pouch. Inside were small jars of spices, cumin, cardamom, turmeric, dried chilies, all ground by hand at home. She sprinkled each one into her pot. She didn't measure. She didn't weigh. She felt. She smelled. She listened to the sizzle in the pan, trusting instincts honed over years of cooking for family, not critics. Some contestants glanced over, amused at her casual method. "Does she even know what she's making?" one sneered. But Mina wasn't listening. She was too deep in memory, her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. "Let the spices talk to each other before you add the meat." She marinated the lamb in yogurt and spices, just as her family had for generations. The aroma rising from her station began to drift, not sharp or pretentious, but warm, deep, nostalgic. It was the smell of home, of stories, of late nights around crowded tables. Soon, something shifted in the room. The nearby chefs, who had mocked her just an hour ago, now glanced sideways, not laughing, but curious, because while their dishes looked flawless, it was her station where the air seemed to hum with something alive, something special. Even one of the judges paused mid-conversation, his nose catching the scent. His eyes drifted toward Mina's corner, brows raising slightly. She didn't notice. She was still cooking with her heart, stirring as if feeding her family one more time. And for the first time in that cold, competitive kitchen, the others started to wonder maybe the woman they'd laughed at knew something they didn't. As the final minutes ticked away, the competition floor buzzed with urgency. Contestants plated their masterpieces, awful constructions of edible sculptures, sauces swirled in perfect patterns, garnishes placed with tweezers. Every plate was designed to impress the eye before the tongue. But Mina worked differently. She didn't build a tower of food or use molds to shape her dish. Instead, she ladled her lamb curry rich, velvety, and aromatic into a simple, rustic clay bowl. She garnished it not with microgreens or gold flakes, but with fresh coriander, a squeeze of lemon, and a sprinkle of her grandmother's secret spice blend. She then placed beside it a round of handmade naan, soft and blistered from the griddle, brushed with ghee and garlic. The smell alone was enough to make the cameraman filming nearby momentarily forget his job. There was no flash on her plate, but there was something else: depth, soul. The head judge, a stern culinary master known for his sharp critiques, stood with his clipboard, ready to dismiss what looked like home food. But then the scent hit him, layers of spices, perfectly balanced. The fragrance of slow cooking, the warmth of tradition. He exchanged a glance with the other judges. One of them murmured, "That smells extraordinary." When the buzzer sounded, Mina stepped back from her station, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't expect applause, She didn't need it. She had cooked with love, and that was enough. The judges began their tastings, moving from one dazzling plate to the next. But when they reached Mina's table, something shifted. The first judge dipped his spoon into the curry, lifted it too. His mouth had paused. His eyes widened just slightly. Then he took another bite, and another. The other judges followed, their faces transforming from polite curiosity to disbelief. This was not just food, it was a story, a memory, an experience. Every mouthful carried warmth, spice, comfort, and a whisper of something sacred. One judge whispered under his breath, This tastes like someone's heart." And in that moment, the laughter and mockery that had filled the kitchen hours ago vanished, replaced by the quiet, undeniable power of a family recipe that no one saw coming. The judges moved on to other plates, but none of them could shake what they had just tasted. They tried delicate seafood foams, complex pastries, and deconstructed stews, but nothing stayed on their minds like Mina's lamb curry. Backstage, the contestants whispered among themselves, watching the judges' expressions closely. The ones who had laughed at Mina earlier were no longer so confident. They glanced at her now, not with mockery, but with curiosity tinged with unease. Mina stood quietly by her station, her hands folded, eyes soft. She wasn't worried about winning. She had already done what she came to do, bring her family's legacy to life one more time. In her mind, she pictured her grandmother's warm smile, her hands guiding Mina's younger fingers over the spice jars, whispering lessons of flavor and patience. Then the head judge returned to Mina's table. He picked up the clay bowl and examined it closely. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. Mina smiled. "My grandmother. She taught me that every spice has a voice, and that cooking is not about impressing eyes, but warming hearts." The judge nodded slowly. "You did more than that?" The cameras captured the rare softness in his voice, the kind of respect that only a dish made with authenticity could earn. Most contestants cook to showcase skills. You cook to share a memory. Mina's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. She had not come with expectations, but hearing those words, that was more than she could have asked for. When the judges retreated to deliberate, Mina watched as other contestants rehearsed their victory speeches. She stayed silent, her heart full, her mind drifting back to the scent of her grandmother's kitchen. She didn't know it yet, but she had already won something far greater than the competition, because in that kitchen filled with lights and cameras, her family's story had finally been heard, and it had left a taste no one would forget. The judges returned to the stage, their expressions unreadable. The host stood ready, microphone in hand. The contestants lined up with bated breath. Mina stood among them, her hands clasped in front of her apron, her eyes calm. She was content, even if the trophy went to someone else. The head judge cleared his throat. This year's competition was fierce. The creativity, the technical skill, the presentation, we were truly impressed by all of you. A murmur rippled through the room, but the judge continued, his voice gaining warmth. One dish stood apart. It reminded us that food is not just technique, it is memory, it is heart. It is the kind of cooking that transports you not to a restaurant, but to a home. Mina's heart fluttered. The winner of this year's championship is Mina. There was a pause, a collective gasp, then applause. Loud, rising, undeniable applause. Some contestants clapped slowly, still stunned. Others smiled genuinely, understanding in that moment that what Mina had created could not be replicated in a test kitchen. Mina stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had won. The host beckoned her forward, placing the heavy gold trophy in her hands. The cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes, but none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the feeling deep in her chest, the certainty that somewhere her grandmother was smiling, that the recipe passed down through whispered lessons and shared meals had finally been honored on a stage, brighter than any she'd ever imagined. The head judge shook her hand firmly. "You reminded us why we all started cooking in the first place." Mina smiled through misty eyes. She did not just win a competition. She had given her family's legacy a new voice, one that would now echo far beyond her kitchen. And those who had laughed at her in the beginning, they stood in silence, realizing they hadn't just underestimated her. They had underestimated the power of a simple dish made with love. In the days that followed, Mina's victory became more than just a headline. It became a story shared around dinner tables, in kitchens, and on television screens. She was invited to interviews, cooking segments, and culinary schools asking her to speak about tradition and authenticity in food. But Mina never let the fame change her. She returned home to her small kitchen, the same one where the recipe was born, where her grandmother's spirit still lingered in every spice jar and worn wooden spoon. She kept cooking, not for cameras but for neighbors, family, and friends. She shared the trophy with her community, placing it not on a high shelf but by the kitchen window, where the morning light could catch it like a quiet reminder. Soon, she opened a modest cooking school, not fancy, not corporate, just a warm space where people of all ages came to learn not just recipes but stories, where flavor was more important than presentation, and where no one was laughed at for how they looked or dressed. One day a young girl asked her, "Did it hurt when they laughed at you?" Mina smiled softly. For a moment, yes. But then I remembered my grandmother always said the best way to silence laughter is to let them taste what they cannot forget. And that was what Mina had done. She had not just cooked. She had told a story through every bite. A story of family, of love, of resilience. A story that the judges, the audience, and even her critics would remember long after the competition lights dimmed. Because some recipes don't just win trophies, they win hearts. And that is a prize no one can measure.